Did you hear the one about the politician who promised that if he was elected, he'd make certain that everybody's income would be above the median? So, actually, if you're ever running for student council, why don't you promise everyone above average grades? Now, we're going to go ahead and look at some distributions to show why that wouldn't work. And we're going to start with percentiles. So below is data from TEA showing the average SAT scores for several high schools here in Central Texas. This is from 2016. And I just went through and I picked some in Austin and Round Rock and Leander and a couple local places. I missed a couple like Vista Ridge. Anyways, so if you look at these, Cedar Ridge is number 13 on the list. Does that mean it's the 13th best? Well, no, because you can see these are in ascending order. Now, Cedar Ridge's average is higher than what percent of schools? Well, the number below it, there are 12 schools that have averages below it, and we have the total number of data points I have here. So they're in the 44, they have 44.4% of the schools are below them. This value is actually known as a percentile. This describes a percentage of data that is below the value. So if you do well on a test and say you get in the 95th or 99th percentile, that means you're above 95 or 99% of the schools. Now, to be fair to Cedar Ridge, where I teach, when I actually pulled in all the data for the 2015, where I had all the high schools, it's actually better than that. So let's go ahead and continue. What percentile is Round Rock High School in? And again, they'll be better with all the high schools in it. Well, there are 16 high schools below it out of 27, so 59.3%, and they would be in the 59th percentile. What is special about the score 1460? Well, if you look at the data, this is 0.14 out of 27. It is the halfway point, so it is the median. All right, so now we're going to introduce some new terms. Q1 is a variable we'll use a lot, and it represents quartile 1. What percentile do you think this should be? Well, most of you figure it out. You say, hey, quartile is like a quarter. And a quarter represents 25%. So yes, it is a 25th percentile. And another way to think of it is that it's the median of the lower half of the data set, not including the median. So my median here is Hendrickson High School. So if I were to take this set of data, this half, from 1 through 13, what's the midpoint there? Well, it's before Hendrickson High School. The median of the first 13 data points is the 7th data point. And Q1, therefore, being the 7th data point, would be 0.7, which has a score of 1217. So Q1 would be 1217. Q3 represents quartile 3. What percentile do you think that should be? Well, it's 3/4 or 75% or 75th percentile. All right. So what should it be for our data? Again, our middle point is 14. So we're going to take the second half of the data, and the median of the last 13 points is going to be this 21st point right here. So Q3 is 0.21 on my list, and it has a value of 1563. Now, we can take all this data and we can display it in what's called a box and whisker plot. Sometimes these are just called box plots. The inner box represents the middle. What do you think? It's the middle 50%, with Q1 to Q3. So from quartile 1 to quartile 3. Not before quartile 1, but between quartile 1 and quartile 3. That line right there, so that's Q1 and that's Q3. So those numbers would go there on the box plot. The line in the middle of the box represents the median. So we would have half the data points before that segment and half after. This two segments sticking out from each end represent the bottom and top 25% of data. The first segment starts at the minimum and the second right there, and the second segment ends at the maximum right there. The minimum, Q1, median, Q3, and the maximum are known as a 5-number summary. Now, I haven't described this piece yet, and that piece is called the interquartile range, or IQR, and it's the width of this central box. And you can find it by subtracting Q1 here from Q3. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to make our own box plot. What is the, first of all, we need to find the 5-number summary. So what is the 5-number summary for the SAT scores we were just dealing with? 955, 1217, 1460, 1563, and 1971. So when I draw it, the lowest part is 955. It's going to stretch all the way to 1971. And the box is going to go from 1217 to 1563, 1217 to 1563 with a line going through it about here at 1460. And there you go. That's the box plot for the SAT data. Now, in this case, all the points really aren't that far away from each other, but sometimes points are really far away from the rest of the group, and we call those outliers. So how do we know if a point is an outlier? Anything that is farther away than 1.5 of the box widths of the IQR is from the box is considered to be an outlier. So is 955 an outlier on the SAT data? Well, let me go ahead and get my 5-number summary. And I'm going to do the IQR by subtracting Q3 minus Q1. I get 346. I'll take this lower part of the box, 1217, and subtract 1.5 of these widths. So anything lower than a 698 would be an outlier, all right? But if it's above 698, it's not considered an outlier. How about our high point, 1971? Same data, but this time I'm going to be adding because I'm going to the high end, right? And if I'm going to the high end, I start from Q3 instead of Q1. So this is a Q3 value right here, plus 1.5 of these IQRs, and I get 2081. Well, my data point is actually lower than that. It's not farther away. So no, it's not an outlier. To be an outlier, it has to be greater than 2018. Now let's go ahead and look at a case where there are outliers. First of all, so I have all this quiz data in here. And if you look, once I put it in order, it makes it easier to pick my outlier. Most of my kids passed, right? Got a couple 60s, always. And then we have someone who totally slept during the class who got a 15. Okay, so my 5-number summary is min is 15, Q1 is 66, my median is 77.5 because it's halfway through my set of data, Q3 is 89, and my max is 100. Are there any outliers? Well, let's go ahead and figure out our IQR. It's 23. My lower boundary for outliers is Q1 minus 1.5 times IQR, or 31.5, all right? My upper one is I add that 1.5 IQR to Q3, and I get 123.5. So the only thing that could be an outlier is right here, this 15, because it's actually outside of this range, so it's an outlier. So when you draw the box and whisker plot, you're going to have that one point right there. So typically when you do a box and whisker plot or box plot with outliers, your stem, this piece right here, this segment, is going to go to the lowest point that's not an outlier. You notice it's not going all the way to 15. We're going to draw 15 separate as an outlier, and this is more normal data. All right, so there's your 15. Here are the different numbers for our box plot. Now, you might occasionally have an unusual box plot, and this is an actual box plot for this data right here. Why did the box plot look so strange? Well, the min is 1, the median is 1. I hate to say this, these are actual AP scores for a high school, not Cedar Ridge, on an AP test. I won't say which one. And I guess they had a rough year because their minimum is 1, their Q1 is 1, their median is 1. Half their people had a 1 or lower. Well, you can't get any lower than a 1. And then their Q3 is 2, and their maximum is 3 instead of a 5. All right? So since the minimum, Q1, and median have the same value, that segment piece in the first box are all collapsed here into the median. They're all the same value. So that's how you can end up with some really unusual box. Statlet is also a great tool for making box plots. So first of all, you enter your variable in the name, and you can see here we've got the geometry quiz data right there, and then you enter your data separated by commas or spaces like I've done right here. Click on Begin Analysis right there below the data, and under Graph Distribution, make sure you select Boxplot. It will normally default to dot plot. Outliers are actually automatically identified as dots on the display. So if it's not in here, it's considered an outlier. And you can actually hover over it and it will show the value of that outlier. Then, if you want the 5-number summary, that's just the last 5 numbers in the summary statistics box right there. So super easy.